Another rejection email, one among hundreds. It blurred before my tired eyes, the words merging into a monotonous chorus of disappointment. Position filled. Thank you for your application. The machines had replaced me. They didn't need intuition anymore, just precision. AI had taken the job, and the people who once relied on me for my unique skills had moved on, leaving me redundant. Codebreaker. An antique title in a world where algorithms could solve anything in milliseconds. I glanced at the ad I'd posted earlier, my last-ditch attempt at clawing back a sense of purpose. It was embarrassing, really. Like a relic clinging to its last spark of relevance. But what else was there? Grocery stores needed baggers. But I didn't belong there. At least not yet. The phone rang, a sharp intrusion on the oppressive silence. I stared at it for a moment, unwilling to let the faint hope stir inside me. Then I picked it up.
Hello?
The voice on the other end was calm but deliberate, carrying a weight that made me sit up straighter.
You posted an ad.
It was an old woman, her voice steady and unhurried. There was no hint of small talk, no pleasantries, just an acknowledgement, as though she already knew who I was.
Yes.
I said cautiously.
I did.
A pause lingered between us, thick and uncomfortable, as though she was deciding what I was worth.
I need help,
she finally said, but it wasn't a request. Her voice had a cold, brittle edge, like something worn down by years of secrets.
Not the kind most people offer. I need someone who can see what others cannot.
I didn't answer right away. There was something off in her tone, something that made me want to hang up, but that same something pulled me in.
What exactly are you looking for? The kind of help that's not advertised,
she said quietly, almost as though she were speaking to herself.
A mind that's still useful.
I felt the question hang in the air, though she hadn't asked it directly. Did she think I was still capable, still worth something? There was an implicit challenge in her words, an unspoken dare.
I can still be useful,
I replied, not entirely sure who I was convincing.
I thought you might.
There was a long, deliberate pause before she continued.
I've acquired something. It's something old, like a Bible, but different. Been studying the markings and symbols on its pages, and I still can't understand all of it. A Bible?
I echoed, trying to mask my growing curiosity. I wanted to ask more, but something told me she wasn't offering answers.
The kind that holds more than words,
she said softly.
I believe there's something hidden in the words. I need someone who can help me find it.
Her voice lingered on the last word. It, as if she was saying more than I could comprehend. I swallowed, sensing the weight of the unknown pressing against my chest.
What makes you think I'm the one who can help?
Another pause, longer this time. I imagined her there, on the other side of the line, assessing me, deciding how much to reveal.
It looks like you haven't found what you're looking for. Excuse me? I imagine your skills are being overlooked. It's clear you're searching for something, aren't you?
Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. It wasn't a question, not really. And yet she knew. I wasn't sure how, but she did. There was no use denying it.
What do you need? Come to me tonight,
she said, her voice softening, as though the decision had already been made.
I'll send you the address.
I hesitated. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong. But the silence that followed her words was louder. The weight of my irrelevance, the gnawing dread of becoming invisible, it pressed down on me, and so I made the only choice I could.
Tonight,
I agreed. The line went dead. The rain had started as I drove out of the city, turning the empty streets into rivers of reflected light. My car's headlights cut through the darkness, each turn taking me further from the familiar and deeper into the forgotten parts of town, where the old mansions stood. Some were beautiful, but most were ancient. And who was I to judge? I didn't even have enough for rent. Her house was one of them, a towering relic of a long-past era. The windows were dark, save for a single flickering light in what looked like the front parlor. The trees around it leaned inward, as though even they didn't want to be seen. I parked and stepped out into the cold, wet air, staring up at the imposing structure. I knocked once, twice. The door creaked open with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The woman who stood in the doorway was small, frail even, but her presence filled the space in a way that made me forget the mansion's size. Her eyes were sharp, gleaming in the dim light. and though she didn't smile, there was something in the curve of her lips that unsettled me.
I wasn't sure you'd come,
she said, stepping aside and allowing me to enter. I hesitated, glancing past her into the dark hallway. I said I would. She nodded, as though that answered something else.
Not everyone follows through.
I stepped inside, the scent of old wood and dust filling my lungs. The door shut behind me with a finality that made my heart race. The hallway was narrow, the walls lined with portraits too faded to make out. Everything felt suspended in time, as though the house itself had stopped breathing long ago. I followed her deeper into the house, each step echoing softly in the stillness.
I've seen many come and go,
she said, her voice low as though we were entering hallowed ground.
Each one thinking they could solve it, that they understood.
And none of them could?
Understanding is dangerous,
she replied, pausing by a door at the end of the hallway. Her hand hovered over the doorknob.
Not everyone should seek it.
Her words hung there, heavy with a warning. Before I could respond, she opened the door, revealing a dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old books, religious relics, and objects I couldn't name. But my eyes were drawn to the table in the center of the room where a single object rested, the Bible. The leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. Symbols were scrawled in the margins, more than simple notes. They were intricate, deliberate.
Here it is,
she said quietly, approaching the table. She placed her hand gently on the book, her fingers tracing the symbols as if they were familiar.
I've come far, but now I need someone who can take me further.
I didn't move. The air in the room felt thick, like it was holding its breath. What do you think is hidden in there? She smiled, but it wasn't kind.
It's not what I think, it's what I know. There are things we aren't meant to see, but they're there, waiting. All you really need is to understand the language.
Her fingers brushed the edge of the book, and I couldn't help but feel that I was standing at the edge of something deep, something I wasn't sure I wanted to dive into. I'll need some time, I said, though I wasn't sure why. I was already too far in.
Time?
Her eyes met mine, sharp and gleaming in the dim light.
We don't have much. We only got this.
I didn't respond. I couldn't. Whatever was hiding in the pages of that Bible was waiting, and now it had found someone to open it. The Bible lay open on the table between us, its ancient pages yellowed and brittle, like parchment teetering on the edge of ruin. The symbols in its margins danced just beyond the reach of comprehension, teasing meaning in ways that stirred something deep in the back of my mind. A familiarity I couldn't place. The old woman sat across from me, watching, always watching. She'd said very little since we began, allowing me to lose myself in the methodical work of decoding. I was grateful for her silence. It gave me space to think. I ran my fingers over the edges of the symbols, tracing their shapes, feeling the indentations as if that tactile contact might unlock something I couldn't see. The markings were a blend of languages, Hebrew, Latin, even remnants of alchemical symbols, but none of them made sense on their own. It was the combination, the sequence that mattered, and I was beginning to understand. There's a pattern, I murmured, more to myself than to her. A rhythm. The old woman's gaze didn't waver.
Is there?
I didn't answer. She always spoke like that, posing questions that weren't really questions. She knew more than she let on, I could feel it, but I was the one doing the work. That was our unspoken agreement. She provided the text, the ancient book riddled with secrets, and I provided the mind capable of untangling its mysteries. I leaned closer, squinting at the intricate symbols scrawled next to a passage from the Book of Revelation. It wasn't the text itself that caught my attention. It was how the symbols warped the meaning of the words. They turned the biblical verses into something else, something far more disturbing. It was like the annotations were feeding on the scripture, twisting it into a language not meant for human eyes. It's not just religious, I said softly, turning the page. The symbols follow a logic, a structure. Look here. The old woman tilted her head ever so slightly, her eyes narrowing as if she were seeing something far away.
Go on.
I pointed to the sequence of symbols beneath a passage about angels descending from heaven. These are coordinates. Not geographical, but celestial. It's as if they're mapping out something in the sky. A specific point or a time. She leaned forward now, her face lit by the dim glow of the candlelight.
Go on,
she repeated, her voice hushed, eager. I think it's a ritual, I said, almost afraid of the words as they left my mouth. It's an invocation. The room seemed to still at that, the weight of my realization sinking in. The symbols weren't just obscure religious commentary, they were instructions, precise and deliberate. And now that I was seeing it, I couldn't unsee it. This Bible had been altered, transformed into something far more dangerous. The old woman smiled, the corners of her mouth twitching up in a way that made my skin crawl.
Finally, you're starting to see it.
I stared at her, searching her face for any hint of what she truly wanted. But she remained impassive, her expression calm, almost serene. Why do you need me to do this? I asked. It wasn't the first time the question had crossed my mind, but it was the first time I'd said it aloud. Her smile didn't waver.
I don't need you to do anything, and remember you chose to help me.
She didn't answer the real question. She never did. I turned back to the Bible, trying to push down the unease bubbling in my chest. I focused on the symbols, letting the pattern pull me in, and with every stroke of my pen, the code unraveled further. The annotations referenced constellations, alignments, celestial movements that hadn't been significant in centuries. Whoever had written this knew things that should have been lost to time. My mind raced as I pieced it together. The invocation, the coordinates. It was all leading towards something beyond the text. And then in one sudden moment, I understood. It's a summoning. The old woman said nothing, but I could feel her eyes on me, watching me absorb the truth. I flipped through the pages, each one confirming what I feared. The symbols didn't speak of salvation or enlightenment. They spoke of something older, something vast and indifferent. There's no angel. Not like in the Bible. This isn't divine. She leaned back, her hands resting in her lap as though she had been waiting for this moment.
Would you like to see?
Her question hung in the air, soft but heavy with implication. Would I? Would I dare to look beyond what we had just uncovered? A part of me screamed to stop, to walk away from this, but I couldn't. I had to see it. I need to see it. Show me, I said, though I hated how true the words felt. She nodded, as if this was the only answer that mattered. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her chair and walked to a cabinet against the wall. She opened it with a soft creak, pulling out several small objects. Candles, an old silver mirror, and a vial of water. Each item was placed carefully on the table, forming a kind of circle around the Bible.
These are the final steps. We've unlocked the message, now we call it forth.
I watched her with growing unease. This was not some ancient ritual full of grand gestures and incantations. It was simple. Too simple. She lit the candles in a slow, methodical rhythm, her movements precise, practiced. The mirror reflected the flickering flames, and the vial of water shimmered in the candlelight as she poured it, tracing a thin line around the Bible's open pages. What exactly are we calling?
You'll understand when it arrives.
I wasn't sure I wanted to. When the last candle was lit, the room seemed to hold its breath. The air was still, the flames steady. There was no sudden shift, no jolt of energy that signaled something was happening. For a moment, I thought nothing had changed. But then I could feel something. It was subtle at first, a pressure in the air like the weight of a storm about to break. The candlelight flickered slightly as though the very atmosphere had thickened, and then slowly a glow began to form. It wasn't bright, it was soft, a shimmer in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and there it was, a light, faint but growing like a flame seen through thick glass. It pulsed gently, expanding and contracting, as though it were breathing. The old woman stepped back, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't speak, but her eyes gleamed with something close to reverence. The light thickened, becoming more tangible, more present. It had no shape, no form I could define, but it was mesmerizing. It filled the room, suffusing the air with a soft glow that felt like it was pressing against my skin, sinking into my bones. What is it?
It is the messenger,
she said, her voice full of quiet certainty.
the light of truth.
The words did nothing to comfort me. The light was beautiful, but there was something deeply wrong about it. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong anywhere. I couldn't explain it, but every instinct in me screamed to look away, to stop myself from staring into that glow. But I couldn't. It was captivating. It drew me in, its pulsing rhythm like a heartbeat that wasn't mine, a presence that filled the room, yet didn't. The closer I looked, the more I felt as though I was being seen, studied by something beyond comprehension. The light shifted just barely, and for a moment I felt it, looking at me, not through sight, not through any human sense. It was aware of me, aware in ways that sent a deep, cold shiver down my spine. There was no malice in it, no kindness either, just a presence, immense and indifferent. I could feel my mind trying to grasp it, trying to fit this being into some framework of understanding, but it slipped through every thought, every perception, like trying to hold smoke in my hands. It was there, but it wasn't. It was everything, but it was nothing. Beside me, the old woman was smiling. Her face was bathed in the light, her eyes shining with that same reverence.
"This is what we've been searching for,"
she murmured.
"This is the truth."
I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my thoughts spiraling. This was no truth I wanted. The light, the messenger, it was beyond me, beyond us, beyond anything I could ever hope to understand. And yet, I couldn't look away. The light pulsed softly, a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. Though it wasn't mine, it was theirs. The room felt both heavy and weightless, as though the space itself couldn't decide whether to bend toward the light or be repelled by it. The old woman stood beside me, her eyes fixed on the shimmering glow that seemed to fill every inch of the room without actually taking up any space. Her expression was serene, as though she had expected this all along, as though she had waited her whole life for this moment.
"You can speak to it. It's calling out to you."
I turned toward her, unsure if I had heard correctly. My pulse quickened, and I felt a strange tightness in my chest. Speak to it? She didn't look at me. Her gaze remained fixed on the light, her face bathed in its eerie glow.
"Not with words, not aloud. It doesn't need any of that. It will understand you."
I turned back toward the entity. The air around it seemed to shimmer, and I could feel something vast and old pressing against my mind, as if waiting for me to open the door. "What are you?" I thought the question, not knowing if it would be heard, but somehow knowing that it already had been. The light shifted, expanding ever so slightly, as though it had drawn in a breath of its own. And then, without sound, without form, a presence filled my mind.
"I am the messenger,"
it said, or rather I felt it say. The words were not words. They were concepts, ideas woven into something deeper than language.
"The messenger of the heavens."
My heart raced, and I felt my thoughts spinning, trying to grasp onto what it had just told me. The messenger of the heavens. The words felt wrong, or maybe incomplete. The light pulsed again, and the pressure in the air deepened, pressing against my skin, my thoughts. "How?" I whispered aloud, though I knew the old woman had said that wasn't necessary. "How does it work?" The entity didn't answer right away, but I could feel it, shifting, settling into my thoughts, almost as though it was drawing itself closer. Then, slowly, it began to explain.
"Summoning,"
it conveyed,
"is an act of focus. To summon is not to call forth from elsewhere, but to manifest what already exists. I do not come from beyond. I am always here, but not in your world. To summon me is to allow my presence to take form, to make matter bend and shape to my will, so that I may be seen."
The room seemed to pulse with the entity's words, its presence settling in my mind like a weight. The old woman was silent now, though I could feel her attention fixed on me, on the conversation she couldn't hear. I blinked, trying to wrap my mind around what the entity had said. Heavens. It had called itself the messenger of the heavens. A thought crept into my mind, one that felt absurd and terrifying all at once. Does that mean God is real? I thought, the question catching in my throat, though I wasn't sure if I was asking it out of desperation or hope. The light shifted again, its glow deepening, thickening as though it were considering my question.
"God,"
it said, the word almost a mockery of itself,
"is just a name, a label. I have been called many names, though not as you understand. I am...
It hesitated, the words growing slippery in my mind.
I am the purpose that guides your belief, though your understanding is limited.
The words rattled in my head, unsettling and vague. I tried to grasp at what it was saying, but the more I thought, the more the meaning slipped through my fingers. God was real, and yet not. The entity wasn't God, not in the way I had been taught to understand. But it was something. My breath quickened. What is God's purpose then? I asked, though every part of me screamed not to. Something told me I didn't want to know, but I had to. For a long moment there was silence in my mind. The light seemed to swell, growing denser, and for a moment I could almost feel it pressing against my consciousness, almost feel it watching me. And then the answer came.
The purpose is to end.
It said simply, its words settling into me like cold iron.
The purpose is to relieve, to unmake what has been made, to remove what has become unnecessary.
My thoughts froze. I could feel the entity's words spreading through me, filling every corner of my mind. Its purpose, the purpose of God, of this messenger, was to end, not to save, not to protect, to relieve, to unmake. The truth hit me like a tidal wave, and I felt the world tilt beneath me. The light swirled, expanding, growing brighter, and I could feel something breaking inside me, something deep and primal. No. The word tore from my throat, though I wasn't sure I had spoken it. My mind screamed, trying to reject the truth that was flooding through me, but it was too late. The entity was already inside, already spreading its purpose through me like a poison. The old woman stood beside me, her eyes fixed on the light, her expression one of rapturous awe. She didn't see it. She didn't understand. She had brought this here. We had brought this here. And now there was no stopping it. Couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. The rage, the horror, consumed me, a wave of uncontrollable fury that I couldn't stop. I reached for her before I knew what I was doing, my hands closing around her frail throat, the heat of the moment blinding me to reason. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock, but I didn't let go. I couldn't. Her skin was cold beneath my fingers, and I squeezed harder, until... darkness. When I came to, the room was still. The light was gone, though the weight of its presence still lingered in the air, like the echo of a scream that hadn't quite faded. I blinked, my vision clearing, and that's when I saw her. The old woman lay beneath me, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, her mouth open in a final, silent gasp. My hands were still around her throat, though the life had long since left her body. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. What have I done? But I knew the answer. I had killed her. In a desperate, violent rage, I had strangled her to death, my mind consumed by the horror of the truth the messenger had revealed, the truth that I had helped to summon something that wanted to end everything. I stared at her lifeless body, my chest heaving with breath, my hands shaking with the cold realization of what I had done. But there was no time. I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could still stop it. I had to stop it. The Bible. My eyes darted to the table, to the open Bible that had brought all of this into motion. Without thinking, I grabbed it, ripping it from the table, the fragile pages crumpling beneath my hands. There was no time for second thoughts. I grabbed the candle and threw it onto the Bible, watching as the flame caught, curling the edges of the paper in a slow, hungry burn. The fire spread quickly, and soon the table was engulfed, the flames licking at the walls, the smoke rising thick and black. I stumbled back, the heat growing unbearable, but I didn't stop. I grabbed what I could, setting fire to everything, every relic, every object the old woman had gathered. I had to burn it all. I had to end this, but as the flames roared around me, I felt it. That presence, that cold, heavy presence pressing against my mind.
You cannot stop this,
the voice said, calm and steady, as though the fire meant nothing.
What must happen has already happened. Time is not as you perceive it. It does not move forward. It is all at once. always.
I felt the heat of the fire mixing with the cold dread that seeped into my bones.
You think you are stopping something. You are not. The past, present, and future are one. They run together like rivers in your mind. The summoning has already happened. The release has already begun, and you cannot burn what has already become part of you.
I stumbled, my legs weak beneath me, my thoughts spinning out of control. The fire raged around me, but the voice, the presence, was inside me now. It was there, in my mind, in my thoughts. I could feel it, threading itself through my memories, through my fears, through every part of me.
You cannot stop what is inevitable.
The voice said, so close now, so loud.
What has been made will be unmade. What has been summoned cannot be undone.
I gasped, my chest tightening as the flames closed in. The truth of its words settled into me, cold and undeniable. Time was not linear. The future, the past, it was all happening at once, and I had been a part of it from the very beginning. The fire had swallowed the mansion whole, its flames crackling and snapping as they consumed everything. The walls, the ceiling, the ancient Bible. But none of it mattered anymore. I thought the fire would be an end, that burning it all down would stop what I had helped to bring into this world. I had been wrong, horribly wrong. The fire burned, but the messenger was still with me.
You cannot stop what has already begun.
The voice echoed in my mind, soft but undeniable, threading through my thoughts with a cold certainty. I stumbled away from the flames, my legs weak, my body trembling. It felt like the world had tilted, like nothing was solid anymore. The messenger's presence was all around me. But more than that, it was inside me. I could feel it in my bones, in the very marrow of my being, a cold, unshakable weight pressing down on my chest. Its voice, its purpose was now a part of me.
The flesh is weak. The soul must be freed.
The words slithered through my mind, soft and calm, as though the messenger were explaining something obvious, something inevitable. The air around me was thick with the heat of the fire, but all I could feel was the weight of the messenger's presence, its cold, detached indifference. I tried to keep walking, to put distance between myself and the mansion, but the world felt strange, like it was shifting under my feet. My vision blurred for a moment, and then a flash. Suddenly, I wasn't outside anymore. I was back in my apartment, sitting in front of my computer. The soft glow of the screen cast long shadows across the room, and there it was, another rejection email. We regret to inform you. I blinked, and the world shifted again. I was back in the mansion's basement, standing over the old Bible, its pages filled with cryptic symbols. The old woman was beside me, her eyes gleaming with something like reverence, but I could barely focus on her. The messenger's presence was everywhere now, filling every inch of the space, pressing in on me. I could hear its voice more clearly now, its cold, steady hum vibrating through my skull.
The purpose is to relieve, to unmake what has been made.
I gasped, my breath catching in my throat as the realization settled in. The messenger hadn't come to deliver a message of salvation. It wasn't here to save us. It was here to unmake us, to remove our souls, to sever the connection between our flesh and our essence. And worse, it had already begun. I staggered back to the street, my legs buckling beneath me. I clutched at my chest, gasping for air, but the pressure inside me wouldn't let up. The messenger was inside me, its presence threading through every thought, every heartbeat. I could feel it, its cold cosmic detachment, watching, waiting.
The flesh is a prison.
The voice whispered.
The soul must be freed.
My knees hit the pavement hard and I collapsed, my fingers scraping against the rough surface. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, but it felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I felt something rip away inside me, something deep and essential, something that had always been there, tethering me to my body. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't move. My hands twitched, spasming as if they didn't belong to me. The messenger had taken something. My soul.
You are relieved,
The voice said, calm and distant. But I wasn't. I wasn't free. I could still feel everything. The weight of my body, the pounding of my heart, the pressure in my chest. I was still here. My consciousness was still tethered to my flesh. But my soul was gone. I gasped for air, trying to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. It was as if something fundamental had been ripped out of me, something that had always been there, guiding me, giving me purpose, giving me feeling. I stood up slowly, my movements stiff, robotic. My heart was still beating, my lungs still drawing breath, but there was no emotion, no spark. Everything felt dull, lifeless.
This is what you wanted.
The messenger's voice echoed.
You are free of the burden of suffering, free of the flesh's constraints.
I stumbled forward, my legs moving mechanically, but the horror was settling in. I was alive, my body was still functioning, but my soul, myself, was gone. And yet my consciousness remained.
You are relieved.
The voice repeated, almost like a chant.
The soul is gone. The flesh remains.
I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, no joy. Just a hollow, cold awareness that I was still here, that my consciousness was trapped in this body, soulless, unable to escape. I had been unmade, but not in the way I had expected. The messenger hadn't freed me. It had condemned me to a fate far worse. The world around me felt distant. I was seeing it through fog. The fire still burned behind me, but I felt nothing as I watched it. The flames danced. The smoke curled into the night sky. But it was all empty now. I was empty. I began to walk, my legs moving on their own, my body acting without my soul to guide it. I could feel the weight of my consciousness still clinging to my flesh, still tethered to this hollow, lifeless form.
This is what it means to be unmade.
The messenger whispered.
To be free of suffering is to be free of the soul.
I wanted to scream, to claw at my skin, to tear myself apart, but my hands wouldn't move. My body was no longer mine. It was a husk, a puppet, and I was trapped inside, aware of every moment, every movement. I kept walking, though I didn't know where I was going. The streets were quiet, the night air cold, but everything felt distant, unreal. I passed people, ordinary people, going about their lives, unaware of the horror I was living. They smiled, they laughed, they talked. I could see the light in their eyes, the spark of something I no longer had. They had souls. I didn't.
This is the relief you sought.
The messenger said, its voice calm, unfeeling.
This is the truth. The soul is the burden. The flesh is the prison.
I felt nothing. No panic, no fear. Just the cold, hollow weight of knowing that I was no longer whole, and there was no escape. I walked aimlessly, my body a machine without a driver. I had no destination, no plan, only the slow, mechanical rhythm of my movements, the empty, hollow existence that had become my reality.
You are now free.
The messenger's voice whispered, but it no longer carried any weight. It was just noise now, a dull hum in the background, fading as it became part of me. I tried to remember what it felt like to feel. Joy, anger, fear, but the emotions were distant, like faded photographs I could no longer recognize. They were gone. My soul had been stripped away, and with it, everything that made me human. All that was left was awareness, a cold, detached awareness that I was still alive but no longer whole. The streets around me were quiet, the night air thick with an unsettling stillness. People passed by, people who, like me, seemed to move without purpose, without feeling. I looked at them, searching their faces for something, anything that resembled life, but their eyes were empty. I wasn't the only one. It had started with me, but it had spread. The hollow emptiness that the messenger had given me was seeping into the world around me, touching everything, everyone. As I walked, I felt a flicker of recognition, a faint, nagging sense of familiarity in the faces I passed. These people, these hollow, lifeless people, I had seen them before. Not them exactly, but their husk-like expressions, their robotic movements. They were becoming like me, They were like me. It wasn't just me, it was everyone. The messenger's purpose wasn't just to relieve me of my soul, it was to relieve all of us. It was spreading, seeping into the world, one person at a time. The same hollow emptiness that had consumed me was now consuming everyone. I watched as a man walked past me, his eyes glazed over, his steps stiff and mechanical. A woman followed, her face blank, her movements robotic. They were all the same, all hollow, all soulless, just like me. I wanted to scream, to warn them, to tell them what was happening, but it was too late. The messenger had already done its work. The relief it promised was spreading, infecting everyone, stripping their souls away, leaving only hollow shells behind. I turned a corner and stopped. Before me, the city stretched out into the distance, the lights flickering like dying stars, but it was wrong. The entire city was wrong. The people, the buildings, the streets, they all seemed faded, like a reflection of a world that had once been alive, but was now dead. And I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just happening to the people around me. It was happening to the world itself. The messenger's purpose wasn't just to unmake us, it was to unmake everything.
The cycle is complete.
The voice said, its tone almost soothing.
Your soul is gone. Your world is relieved.
I looked around, watching as the last remnants of life drained from the world. The city, once bustling with energy and movement, now felt frozen, trapped in a never-ending moment of lifelessness. I could see it in the faces of the people, the hollow eyes, the blank expressions. They were like me now. We were all the same, and there was no escape. No one to stop it. No one left with a soul to fight back. I stood there for what felt like hours, watching the city fade before me, watching as everything and everyone became part of the same hollow existence I had been condemned to. There was no joy, no fear, no pain, only the cold, mechanical awareness that life was continuing, but without meaning, without purpose. I closed my eyes, letting the emptiness wash over me. There was no point in fighting it anymore. The messenger had already won. I had already lost. And now, so had everyone else. I opened my eyes one last time, staring out at the lifeless city, the empty streets, the hollow people moving through the motions of life without feeling, without purpose. This was the new reality. This was the world we had become. And now, I welcomed it. I really like exploring cosmic horror. It's probably my favorite, only second to psychological horror stories. Or is it the same thing? I wanted to create a sense of unease, like things were spiraling out of control for the main character, and I hope that came across. But now I want to hear from you. What did you think of the story? Did the twist surprise you? Could you feel the tension building up? Please drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to see how you'd react if you were in the protagonist's shoes. Watch the next video for more scary horror for adults, and do subscribe. It helps me a lot. Thanks for watching.